the past 30 days have been pretty remarkable across much of Kansas. And I know that there are still some areas that haven't picked up as much water as what they would obviously want to. One of those areas being in southeast Kansas. You see some pretty good deficits there over the past 30 days, on the order of about 1 to 3 inches. That 3 inch deficit or close to it just to the east of Wichita. But farther back to the west and northwest, the dry areas have gotten a lot more spotty, and we've seen some beneficial rain flow in. Now, so obviously, some of that has come at a price with some hail. We had a big rain and hail event, just a couple of nights ago down around Hugoton, Liberal, Dodge City, and then southward into the Oklahoma Panhandle, where they've had some substantial rain totals on the order of about 4 to 9 inches there. But I think in general, we would take the last 30 days of what we've seen across the region versus what we saw the previous 30 days, where we needed a drink. So for the most part, the forecast has been working out fairly well. And that kind of begs the question, just how much longer is this going to continue? So let's talk about some forecast data that's going to take place over the next couple of weeks. It likely is not going to be as optimistic as maybe some folks would like. This is the Euro precipitation forecast for the next couple of weeks. And again, this is anomalies, okay? So this is above and below average, and you can see a whole lot of brown on the map there from eastern Colorado across the majority of Kansas. And I always stress to folks that these anomalies, that doesn't mean that it's not going to rain at all, okay? That just simply means that the rain totals are going to be below average for the next couple of weeks. And this time of year, there can always be what I call happy accidents, okay, where you get one thunderstorm to blow up, it kicks out an outflow, and that outflow triggers additional thunderstorms. This type of model and most models cannot account for any of that until the event is actually happening. So I know that may look like bad news at face value. It isn't necessarily good news either, but it could be a whole lot worse. And the Euro model and the GFS model are very similar in that type of a forecast. You can see with the GFS here, a pretty good dry anomaly over central and south central Kansas, southeast Kansas, down into Oklahoma. And really the driest corridor has been far south central Kansas down into northern parts of Oklahoma. And that becomes a growing problem because when you dry the soil out that much, especially this time of year with these long days, high sun angle going into the middle of summer, it dries the soil out even more, and it becomes tough to break down in terms of the overall pattern. By that, I'm saying not only do you dry the soil out and you continue to dry things out, period, but the drier you go, the hotter things will eventually get. And that's kind of what I'm going to allude to here in just a moment. But if we look at the forecast precipitation anomaly for the month of July, okay, this is just specifically for the month of July with this particular model, it does show a very similar like pattern where you see the higher rainfall deficits south central Kansas down in north central Oklahoma, and lesser deficits the farther northeast you go and maybe farther out west. But by and large, drier than average, I think, is probably going to be the way to go for the majority of July. And it is likely going to be hotter than average, too. And this is exactly what I was talking about just a second ago. These are departures from average, okay? The forecast temperature anomaly for the month of July is putting most of Kansas anywhere from 6 to as much as almost 10 degrees above average. This takes into account nighttime lows and daytime highs. So this is just the overall temperature anomaly. But when you're seeing something that's significant, it means a couple of things. We're not cooling down as much as we should during the night, and that gives us an even bigger head start temperature-wise as we go into the next day, and that's what's producing the anomaly to such a high degree right there over south central Kansas, where you see anomalies on the order of about 8 to 9.5 degrees Fahrenheit above average for the month of July. Folks, this really hasn't changed as far as our thinking is concerned over the past several months, where we thought we'd probably be okay as we got into June, but beyond June, that's where the trouble would probably start because we would lose the benefit of having temperatures that have been relatively tame. I know we've had some hot, windy days at times, but it's just been 1 or 2 days, and then we cool things off. As we progress into July and August, I'm less optimistic that we're going to see breaks from that hot weather and the drier conditions too. So this is pretty much right in line with what we've been thinking going forward into the summer, being hotter than average and also likely drier than average. It has a lot to do with our sea surface temperature anomalies. This particular map tells the story where we've got a cooling ENSO region off the west coast of South America. We've got a warm Atlantic Ocean out here off the west coast of Africa, all the way into the Gulf of Mexico. The negative PMM, or Pacific Meridional mode, is the cool water from the Baja in California all the way out toward Hawaii, and then a negative PDO in the Gulf of Alaska. The one thing that has changed is that the warmer than average pocket there, where that red arrow is, has started to try to make some inroads toward the west coast of North America. Now, it'll be interesting to see if that has any staying power, or if we just go completely back to the cooler than average stuff. I don't think we necessarily know that just yet, but I think whether or not that happens, okay, there will be a couple of things that take place. If that whole area warms up, well, the upper Midwest and the Corn Belt will likely do okay in terms of getting some regular bouts of rain. If we turn that off cool, then that really becomes a big problem in the midsection of the country. So right now, where it's kind of a mixed bag, I'm more concerned about areas, say, from Kansas, southward in Oklahoma, and North Texas and westward being drier than average versus maybe the entire Corn Belt. Iowa's doing okay right now, going to get some moisture. I think the big worry for the Corn Belt right now is Illinois and Indiana, where they haven't had as much beneficial rain. So the sea surface temperature anomalies, I know at face value, think, well, how does this work and determine? It plays a big factor into how things eventually turn out over the next 3 months, and that's obviously going to be critical. The one thing that doesn't change here overall is the flavor to the sea surface temperature anomaly forecast. This is the forecast from the Euromodel for July right through December. You see that we have La Nina conditions going on from the west coast of South America. And generally speaking, the area from the Baja to Hawaii doesn't change a great deal. The Gulf of Alaska doesn't change a great deal. So I'm not necessarily sure how much we are going to change overall from where we are right now, at least during the next couple of months. After that is also interesting because I think we firmly keep the negative PDO going forward into winter. The big question mark here at the Euro is it doesn't have a very strong or long-lasting La Nina episode. You see it being fairly weak right there. And by weak, I mean the lighter blue shading instead of the deep dark blues there as we head into the back third of this year. The Euromodel, I'm not necessarily sure has the greatest handle on this because the NMME model has been very consistent in producing a stronger and more expansive La Nina episode. And you can see it. This goes from August right through to February. So it still has La Nina conditions right there, but by February, I think the overall trend will be for La Nina to slow and actually start to be phased out. That is based on historics too. That's usually when a La Nina episode would fade. The one thing that doesn't change a whole lot is just the PDO. It's negative, and that usually doesn't benefit us to a great degree during the winter, and obviously as we headed into spring. I think eastern Kansas does better when that happens versus western Kansas, dry fall, dry winter type of scenario with the way it stands out for right now. We'll talk more about that longer range forecast as we wrap up this year and go into next year, next month. But that's kind of what we're standing up against as we head into the next, few months here. The Euro seasonal model precipitation forecast, this is for July, actually has wetter than average conditions for the eastern half of Kansas and drier than average conditions out west, which is interesting because the Euro model that works in a shorter term dries us out a lot more than the seasonal model right here. So there's a couple of things that are possible. A, the Euro seasonal is just not completely with it, or B, maybe we have some type of tropical moisture come up from southeast Texas that clips the eastern half of Kansas. Maybe that's what the Euro model is signaling right here. Either way, I think I would trend toward the drier than average and the warmer than average versus wetter than average across the board. If we get the moisture, great, but I think it would kind of have to be a one and an all or nothing type of a thing with something from the tropics, because you don't have to go too far to the west to really start to dry things out far western Kansas and obviously into Colorado. August, again, I think would be built around a tropical moisture feed is why the Euro model is signaling this. And you can see that tropical moisture feed from the western Gulf of Mexico through most of Texas, Oklahoma, and on up into Kansas. So if we were to get above average moisture in August, it would have to be from the tropics, not necessarily from any significant monsoon moisture that's coming out from the west and pushing to the east. So that's something that we're going to continue to look at closely. September pretty much dries out the entire state in terms of moisture, which again, obviously I know a lot of winter wheat would be going into the ground at that time. We obviously need some moisture to put that wheat in the ground. Even if we've got the subsoil moisture to work with, we're going to need something to work with, at least in terms of even just a little bit of rainfall to help get it up. So, but tend toward drier than average right there. And in July, August, September, temperature-wise, with the Euro seasonal model, it also is forecasting warmer than average conditions for the entire state. Maybe not to the extreme in the far south, southeast part of the state, but again, like I said, it kind of bucks the trend versus what the shorter range Euro model is showing versus the seasonal stuff. So it's something that definitely bears watching, but I would still err on the side of caution of hotter than average over the next few months, and also drier than average. The NMME model, looking at the precipitation forecast, generally is forecasting average conditions there across most of Kansas, with a slight tip toward drier than average in west and northwest Kansas for July, August, and September. The core of the dry signal is situated farther west, out across most of Colorado, down into New Mexico and Arizona. But that's obviously, because of a diminished monsoon that's going to take place during the next few months. And then if we look at the temperature trend, well, it's got most of Kansas there. Well, it's got all of Kansas hotter than average, but it also really starts to flex the heat there on the western half of the state for the next 3 months. So again, the seasonal models, and by seasonal, I mean the Euro seasonal and the NMME, have a more favorable outlook for moisture across Kansas. For, I think, August is the real tell right there. For July, maybe not necessarily so much, but for August, I think that might be kind of where the weight is being put in this seasonal forecast from the seasonal models. If I can, I do want to go back here to take you back to what that Euro seasonal model was showing for the month of July, which is right there. Okay. And you can see the wetter than average stuff there for the eastern 2/3 of Kansas. But if we go backwards even more, and I'll show you just as a refresher what that the Euro model was forecasting for the next 30 days. Again, not necessarily 30 days, but for July, it paints a little bit of different signal. And you might ask yourself, well, what's the difference here between the Euro seasonal and this model? This model runs every day, okay? And every day it's looking at what the conditions are. And if the conditions are dry, when this model initializes on this particular day, it has a tendency to project dryness through the entire forecast. So the thing that I've been looking at is this particular model has had a dry forecast for the month of July now for a while. So is it on to something or not? I'm thinking it might be on to something, at least for July. Not only because of the recent trend and the dryness that's been existing across far south central and southeast Kansas down into Oklahoma, but because of the pattern that's changing, for the next couple of weeks, favors a tip toward drier than average. So if we dry things out for the next couple of weeks and we get less favorable in a less favorable pattern to bring moisture to us during July, that's where something like this for the month of July would not only end up drier, but also in a hotter fashion. So I just wanted to revisit that there just for a little bit to show you kind of what I was thinking as to reason why I thought it would be important to look between the two. And that is that. So with that in mind, if you have questions, please fire away.
Well, Brian, I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about, as we kind of talked about it off screen right before we went on, was, what does that July really mean? Are we looking at a decent possibilities, or are they just strictly basing that on tropical storms? And if that doesn't happen, maybe we get drier than normal or drier than expected in July.
Yeah, I have a real hard time, at least this far north. Okay, I have a real hard time putting all my eggs in the tropical basket, because that model runs once a month. Okay, and if you run that once a month, a lot of times that model is not going to be able to pick up on the little intricacies that goes on during that next 30-day period. That tropical moisture, if it moves to the east just 200 miles, we're out of it. Okay, so and this particular model does not have that resolution and that advantage of running every single day to pick up on that type of potential pattern. Now, obviously, I know we do these videos, once a month, but this is something that I'm going to be analyzing every single day and including in the email updates that I send out there as well, because it really is important stuff. Because for those of us that have had the moisture, lately, to finish off the wheat crop and to build some beans and to go forward. And I know there's been a lot of Milo go on the ground lately, too, especially out west. And obviously the corn crop that's going to continue to grow. That July signal is something important because we haven't had a lot of extended heat to deal with. We've been benefiting from these breaks in that hotter and that windier weather, and also been blessed with some moisture. So if the pattern just completely flips, it won't take long for things to go to worse conditions in a pretty short order. So while I've got the model that runs every day that is tending toward drier than average, and the one that runs every month trending toward wetter than average, this is something that I'm going to be massaging pretty much almost daily or every other day to send out those updates, because I think, first of all, it should be top of mind, and it's going to be important one way or the other. If we see the moisture, great. If we don't, it's certainly something that we're going to have to plan things around.
No, I appreciate that. Uh, Somebody text me here. As we started this, uh, journey in November, right? And we started talking about PRF and we started talking about moisture. It seemed like some of that moisture started to. It looked, as we talked in probably some of that April timeframe, May. Really, now we're looking at more. April wasn't so wet. May, June. Are we looking to push this La Nina and some of this drought deeper into the fall, uh, as we had talked about, or you think that La Nina's maybe still on schedule from where we initially talked back in that November, December timeframe?
Well, for certainly the western half of the state, whenever there's a La Nina, I'm always worried about drier than average. Okay, eastern Kansas plays by a little bit different rules in that regard, especially far eastern Kansas. So if you live in the western half of the state, yes, I am still firmly on board toward dry fall and likely dry most of this winter. The farther east you get, as I said, sometimes that doesn't work out. And the La Nina really does that. The farther west and south you go, that's where the drier signal is more stout. And then until you get across Texas and the Gulf Coast, and the dry signal is always there. The farther east and northeast you go, that's where you have a benefit of getting into a better storm track and more favorable. So when we start talking about PRF sign up, this fall, that's still something that I'm going to be very much on board with, unless this La Nina miraculously just goes away. And I don't see that happening. I think it'll be here in one way, shape, or form. And even a weak La Nina still can have some pretty significant impacts for the western half of Kansas.
Well, and as you talked about the Euro model, um, yeah, it was definitely a lighter blue, right? And looking at a less impactful La Nina, I think some
Yes.
of the people that are on the meeting, we've heard some of the tree ring stuff and the solar flare stuff and a lot of different things of some negativity towards more drought next year. Do you think that looking at the models now that drought, that La Nina, not necessarily the drought, but the La Nina could be shorter lived?
Uh, do I think it's going to be a triple dip like what we saw a couple years ago? No, I don't. I think this La Nina will probably act like a more traditional La Nina would. And by that, I'm saying it builds late in the summer, it peaks out from about November to January, and then it starts to see its way out when we go into springtime. And that's that therein lie really is the difference between western Kansas and eastern Kansas. And I know that they are two entirely different parts of the state in terms of everything, okay, especially moisture. So you get a storm that comes out of the Rockies with the pattern, and it doesn't gather moisture until Wichita. Well, if you live, along and east of I-35, you're just fine. But that doesn't do anything for the folks that are out west, because other than just make the wind blow and be dry and the dirt's flying and so on and so forth. So the fact that the La Nina could be on its way out during spring, I think also helps to benefit the eastern half of Kansas versus the western half. The bigger picture here, though, isn't necessarily about just the La Nina. The bigger picture is I don't see the PDO changing. It is in a very negative and a cold state. And even if we kind of relax that a little bit during the heart of this summer, I don't have a whole lot of optimism that it's going to stay that way as we go into fall and winter. It will probably get more cold and more negative after we get through summer, just simply because that's how things have worked out historically. And I didn't see one shred of evidence in those long-range sea surface temperature anomaly forecasts that would suggest anything different than that. So even if we get the La Nina to go away, negative PDO or cold PDO for Western Kansas is not a good thing. Okay, so it really is a tale of two different sides of the state, and that's obviously something that we all know, and that's something we'll have to continue to look at very closely in terms of who's going to see what going forward.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the insight on that. And as a company, we cover both sides, into Missouri, into Colorado, into Nebraska, into Oklahoma. And so, yeah,
Right.
we have to be paying attention to all that and how it impacts us. So with that, thank you, Brian. Thanks for jumping on tonight. If you guys have additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to Brian. We can continue to have this conversation. And then next month we'll continue to do a live meeting. So thank you all for joining. I appreciate everybody jumping on, and we'll talk to you next month.
Thanks, guys. Be well.
Thanks.